What is up guys, Rekus here with a new video, and today with my third part of my final verdict on Star Swordsman Mockman series. And today we want to focus on the PvP aspect of Star Swordsman Mockman. And we basically already did quite a bit of testing during my live stream, which you can still find the footage of on the channel. Basically find the 3-hour long video and then basically watch the last 20 minutes of it. I think the last 20 to 30 minutes were the PvP testing. And it's worth watching that actually, because you can see the abilities of Mockman in PvP. We mainly focused on the burst, I think. And that's quite interesting as well. But that's not what we want to do today. Today I basically thought we go into a bit of theory crafting, which is something some people wanted me to do. So I thought I do that now and build two teams for you guys. Basically I built two teams, one basically for each of his stances. We want to get the most of each of his stances, and I basically thought about how we can do that. So the first stance we actually want to take a look at is the Star Ascending stance. So what does Mockman do in the Star Ascending stance? Basically he's very defensive. He heals off his HP at the end of his attack at the end of each round, gives the team a block buff, and beyond that doesn't have the greatest damage dealing capabilities. His Star Ascending active bonus is basically only reducing the enemy attack, and we gain Ascending energy. And I thought, like, well, the Ascending energy is actually quite interesting, because whenever we take an active or a basic attack, we gain 1 layer of Awakening energy, which we don't need for this build, but it's nice to get some burst for our endgame, I would say. And then we deal 1200% of attack damage to all enemies and 50% of that damage again to the Ohm of Rift enemies. That's quite a lot. Sadly, that doesn't scale with the tree sublimations, because if we take a look here, this is actually the same skill. So sadly, no buffs from that, but still a very decent skill, and we can do something with it. And the way I basically thought about scaling that is, we have all this block and we want to gain attack, so which hero do we use? Of course, it's Panda. And if we take a look at Panda, we can see this skill, and this passive skill is basically when allies block 6 times in total, CO increases all allies attack by 20% and armor by 20% for 3 rounds, and the bonus is double on himself. And actually we're looking at the V0 Panda here, so if you have the Panda at V3 or higher, it will actually be 25% of attack and 25% armor. So of course you should upgrade the Panda. Just for the sake of demonstrating, I didn't go that far. So basically we want to get our team to block as much as it possibly can, which is quite easy to achieve with some block star spawn. For example, we have the Fortress star spawn, which provides us already with 30% of block, and after round 1 we will gain a Mockman block buff, because our Mockman is actually in slot 1, which isn't too important. It's one of the 2 front row slots, and thereby grants us a wonderful 45% block buff, which will guarantee for us, or make it rather likely, that we can actually block enemy attacks. So that's basically the first part. The first part is we block a lot of attacks, gain a lot of attack, and our heroes become way more tanky, and our Star Ascending energy, I wanted to say. Ascending energy gets stronger, and our counterattacks whenever a Mockman gets hit get a lot more effective, and will take decent chunks out of the enemy HP. And we get a lot of hits through that, because in theory the enemy can hit Mockman up to 6 times a round, so we get up to 6 counters every round, which is a ton of damage actually. And with the right scaling can easily destroy an enemy team, even if it's a tanky one. Beyond that, we have some slight problems, that mainly being very bursty teams that can clear us before we even have a chance to probably scale our buffs, and I countered that by using a Ferric Vessel with an energy artifact. The Ferric Vessel with the energy artifact will give us an active on turn 1, and that actually will heal our allies by 720% of attack for 2 times and add a shield equal to 100% of healing. And that will make it more likely, I don't want to say guarantee with all the crazy heroes like STSFX and whatever out there, but it will make it more likely that we survive the first round. Beyond that, this Vesa should actually be faster than our Freya, and by feeding the Freya, she will actually be at 70 to 80 energy, so by taking a few enemy hits could actually also do an active on turn 1. If not, she will do an active on turn 2, which is still okay. I recommend, if you try to copy this build, that you experiment with using a Demon Bell on her too, because it's actually worth to go for a Demon Bell, because whenever she does her active, she gains 1 layer of illusionary factor and spreads Mirage Pollen on the enemy. And Mirage Pollen is a nice debuff or skill effect that actually makes it possible for all of our heroes to dodge enemy attacks, which is quite nice and will save us from a lot of damage. And beyond that, the first layer of evolutionary factor is quite insane, I have to say. Where is it? Let's look for it. There it is. Because this layer will actually grant us damage reduction by 40%, which will keep us alive very well, and control immunity by 25%. And the control immunity is also quite important, because in the meta we currently see a lot of Starving Jara. People use Starving Jara and very bursty teams together to kill our heroes, so having more control immunity will ensure that not all of our heroes get CC'd, which is one thing I also took in mind with the imprints for Mockman. We actually have control immunity here. And I really like the control immunity aspect for this build, because the attacking part is not really the thing that we care about. It's more about getting use from our ascending energy, and during my testing I actually found out that hard CC, like the one you see from Starving Jara for example, will lock down our ascending energy and will no longer do counterattacks. So using the control immunity imprint actually helps with that quite a lot. Beyond that, this is a skill effect, shouldn't be able to crit. I haven't seen it crit during my testing, so getting rid of a crit damage imprint that I would have likely used instead doesn't hurt us too much. We can definitely use control immunity over that. You can also do that for the Vesa, use DR crit control immunity. Would also be alright, and maybe make your team survive a little bit more, because having a Vesa that can actually heal your team and does not get controlled will help you quite a lot. Beyond that, we can talk about homeowners. I would recommend focusing on Mockman as a main homeowner, and maybe if you have more materials, go for the Vesa. Getting some materials on the Vesa is actually quite good, because if she doesn't have a little bit of a buff, she oftentimes won't heal your team quite a lot. I went a bit above that. You have maybe noticed that you have not seen the last hero. The last hero is kind of a flexible slot. I put an SFX in here. I actually like the idea of having SFX in the slot. Requires you to have a little bit more of CI, but I have to max some, so I can use SFX as a main homeowner and my Mockman as a main homeowner too, by putting the rest of my materials on the Vesa. And what I like about SFX is actually her core for this build. Her core basically gives us, as soon as she gains impeccable flow, which she can gain through blocks, which is quite nice for this build. It's like a little block synergy, fits in quite nicely. Will give us Flow Incarnation. And Flow Incarnation basically behaves like a small AMB that reduces the damage taken equal to 80% of the owner's attack, and that together with the crown and the damage reduce and our extra armor and shields through Vesa actually give us quite a lot of tankiness as long as SFX can get a kill. Then again, it's by no means mandatory to use an SFX with a noble core for this build. It's quite nice. You can also go for Sherlock, which was often used before, or if you want to counter CC even more, it might even be an option to use like a V4 Ignis, maybe with an MSS, that can be kind of like a suicide hero. And then you would actually put the SFX, not the SFX, out of the team, and use the Ignis in slot 6 and put the Ferric Investor in slot 5 so that she gains the buff that Ignis gives her on death, which would make her control immune. So you could actually have a Vesa that will never be controlled, or you can do the same for Mockman if you want that. Put the Ignis in slot 2 and let her give Mockman the control immunity buff, which would also be quite nice. For that, I would recommend that you don't really do like a 9-star Ignis. It should be a proper E5 Ignis, maybe with Unbending Will and everything, so that she can take a few hits and give us some time to actually scale our buffs. Another thing I like about SFX in that slot is that SFX has a sublimation that kind of fits the theme of this team. She has a sublimation that says every dodge or block increases self-attack by 1% for 6 rounds. I haven't tested if it's all blocks on the team. I would imagine not. I would imagine it's just her blocks, but still fits the theme. I like it, and she's quite a potent damage dealer, and taking out some of the enemies in the team, getting the Flow Incarnation would actually be quite nice. Beyond that, another good choice for a core is of course our Vesa core, that will give us a little bit of heal, remove debuffs and give us shield, so more survivability is also quite nice. And also the Mockman core is a very decent choice. We can have a look at that. Give me a second. If we check it here, that actually has 2 effects. The first one is the Star Ascending effect, which will give our team 15% damage reduction in its noble form, which is a nice buff to have at the beginning of a fight. And beyond that, we can do some bonus damage if our heroes are attacked, so that's also quite great and also fits the theme of this team quite well. I would even reckon that this might be the more solid choice than the SFX, because this doesn't require you to get a kill with SFX. It will just activate at the beginning of the fight and instantly grant you 15% of damage reduction. The basic idea beyond that of this team is to last a little bit, to survive a few rounds, basically chip the enemy down, and everything that didn't die until like round 3, maybe 4, will fall prey to Mockman, because he will switch to his more offensive stance, he will switch to his Star Descending stance, and at this point all the enemies will have FVoM of Rift on them, and he will hail a massive burst down on them and basically kill the rest. I would reckon the team that can most likely counter it are very aggressive SFX burst teams and Starving Jara teams, so it's kind of a little bit off meta, as those Starving Jara teams are everywhere in the meta, and you rely on RNG at this point to not get CC'd by them. It's still a nice team, and I would recommend you keep it in mind for like a slower meta if that is upcoming, and try to use something like this maybe in a few weeks. Maybe you have to really check the meta. I can't predict the future here, but I think it's a nice option and quite a cool team at that. And making use of the counterattacks from our Mockman is actually quite nice. So now let's have a look at the second team. The second team is actually one use pretty similar heroes, but now the Mockman is actually in the back row, and what this enables us to do is we will do a big burst. In this team, it is important that Mockman is the main homeowner and that he is faster than the SFX. The reason for this is that we want our Mockman to do his Star Descending active right at the beginning of turn 1. In the best case scenario, he is the fastest hero on the field, does his active, and as I said in my skill review, we can use his active skill, sublimation for the third skill to get 1 additional FVoM of Rift on the field, and with that additional FVoM of Rift, the active, the Star Descending active will actually hit 3 enemies in the enemy team, burst them down. If we have good RNG, which is kind of something we rely on with this team, we can get those enemies very low or even kill them, and afterwards our SFX attacks and starts to clean up the enemies. In this team, the Noble core for SFX is actually a lot better than the core for Mockman. The core for Mockman only grants us crit, but can still use the Mockman core because it grants us additional hits and makes it easier to get through unbending will layers. So basically the idea, burst the enemy down with Mockman, have good RNG to hit some high priority targets and basically clean them up with SFX and maybe later on even with the two Rogans, though those are only there to give us a general little bit of speed and make our Mockman a little bit faster. If you have problems getting Mockman faster than SFX, then maybe use another artifact than an AMB. AMB with the 70% speed can make it quite difficult to actually outspeed SFX. Beyond that, we have Theorycrafting Vesa for a general bit of heal like in the other team, and Mystic Fairy Freya in that case also for the damage reduction. But also for this skill, basically every time an ally attacks, they gain 10% all damage reduction and 10% attack, which also helps for the other team, of course. What is really important though is to get this skill here, as this will make our active skill for Mockman way more effective and make it actually hit 3 instead of 2 enemies and give us a higher chance to kill enemies off. If you can't get that, this team can still work, and I actually have some specific scenario in mind in which this team could actually work and in which this team could actually be a problem for big whales. So why can this team be a problem for big whales? In the recent Ace championship, we saw a lot of whales actually solo or nearly solo entire guilds. And the way they mostly did it was with Starwing Jara CC teams. And those Starwing Jara CC teams all work pretty similar. The Starwing Jara is like the fastest hero on the team. She does a basic on turn 1, and then on turn 2 she has the highest speed. The other heroes have like Snow Hearts, and then she does a CC and the fight is basically over because you take a lot of damage and the rest of the team cleans your team up, and the Starwing Jara team goes out of the fight basically without taking any damage. This is actually different if you put your burst on turn 1. If you have a lot of burst on turn 1, like through a Mockman and through an SFX like in this team, there is actually a chance you kill that Starwing Jara off on turn 1. And if that Mockman happens to hit the Starwing Jara, then this whale won't do very long and won't survive very long, because this basically his winning condition is gone at this point. But even if you can't kill the Starwing Jara, there is still a decent chance that you kill off maybe a Rogan, maybe 2 Rogans, maybe you get the Freya, maybe you get some other hero. The chance to kill something with this team is actually quite high. And I think this is a decent option, even if you can't copy the build in its entirety. Even if you don't have the Snow Hearts, you don't necessarily need the Snow Hearts to be a problem for the Starwing Jara team in like Ace. It's better to have them, because you avoid the enemy Mystic Fairy Freya attacking and giving all the heroes in the enemy team 40% damage reduction. But even if you don't have the Snow Hearts, you can run this team with crowns, you can run this team with demon belts, and make use of this mechanic by letting Mockman attack first and then SFX to clean up enemy heroes and to really inflict damage on a team that might even be much stronger than your team is. And this is basically the idea I had with this team, and I hope some of you will try it. It might not always work. Sometimes you get really bad RNG with Mockman, and he does like 1 chase and everything is done. And beyond that, you kind of have to focus on Mockman quite a lot, because in the way he stands here, he wouldn't really work that well. I would definitely recommend getting all the active skill sublimations to get guaranteed chases and extra chases. Basically look into my skill review if you care for it and want to know more about it. And I would also recommend getting this skill, this sublimation, to make is burst a little bit bigger. Basically, it's 50% extra damage for the active. That's basically what that is. If you use it in that way, that's 50% extra damage just from this sublimation alone. So definitely worth getting. Beyond that, you don't really need a lot. You need those two heroes, the SFX and the Mockman, the right speed order, and this is optimal. I think, in my opinion, this is an optimal way to build this team. Most of the imprints I used on those here, this is maybe a mistake. I have to correct myself. I use control immunity. I think I would go for crit damage. So this is the R crit damage, which is kind of the general imprint set I use for most of my burst-oriented heroes. For my Freya, I usually use the R armor block because she doesn't really do a lot of damage anyway. But for something like Vesa, for something like SFX and Mockman, I tend to use the R crit damage, which I would recommend for this team too. So, I hope you guys like this video. Some theory crafting here, maybe some ways that you can do better in the next Ace Championship and avoid that big whale wiping your entire guild. Of course, it will still require you to have a certain amount of strength, but maybe you can make it possible. Save the grace of your team, save the honor of your guild, and tell me if you could test any of those teams. It's a little bit hard to do testing at the moment. I would love to show you gameplay of those teams, but like only showing those teams and setting those teams up would have costed me, like, I don't know, 40, 50, 60 soul symbols and like 20,000 gems, and it was basically, I would run out of gems in like a second to do those videos. Sadly, this is the way the game currently works, but I hope you can make some use of those theory crafting. And if you tested one of those teams, please comment and tell me how it worked. Did it save your guild an ace? And with that, guys, I wish you a great week, and we will see us in the next video.